was caught this week by some of the words from our collect this morning. We asked God, make us love what you command so that we may merit what you promise. There were three things that caught me about it. First of all, the connection between God's commands and God's promises. It seems to me in our culture, which doesn't hold obedience in very high esteem, it's good to remind ourselves that God's commands and God's promises are linked, that God's commands lead us to God's promises. God doesn't command because God is a tyrant or because it's good for God in some way, but God makes commands to us for our good. They will lead us to eternal life. Make us love what you command so that we may merit what you promise. That word merit is troublesome to some because we can say, okay, I'll do all God's commands, I'll be a good boy or something, do everything God says, and then I'll get to heaven. That's not what we mean either. But I guess the word merit caught me partly because we're hearing so much this year about Luther and the Reformation, And that was a word that troubled Luther greatly. It was a concept that troubled him greatly. And he, as you know, opted for the attitude of faith alone, that we're not saved by any works of ours, but only by Christ's work and our faith in that work. The church has rejected that idea, but it has also rejected the opposite idea. In the 4th century, a monk named Pelagius taught that we can reach eternal life solely on our own merits, that we can earn our own way into heaven. And the church rejected that as well. We stand, I guess you might say, in between them. First of all, let me say something about the word merit. It doesn't really mean in our day and age what it meant in the 16th century. As you know, words change usage and meanings. A better word really for that word merit would be fruits. That would be more in keeping with what was it meant in the 16th century. And I'll read to you what the council said. If anyone says that the good works of the one justified are in such manner the gifts of God that they are not also the good merits of him justified, or that the one justified by the good works that he performs by the grace of God and the merit of Jesus Christ, whose living member he is, does not truly merit an increase of grace, eternal life, and in case he dies in grace, the attainment of eternal life itself, and also an increase of glory, let him be anathema. That's pretty clear, isn't it? I did that just to fool with you a little bit. What's the council saying there? Really what the council is saying is that let no one say that the good works that one does are only the gift of God, that are only grace, and not also the free and chosen works of that person. The good that I do is not only because God's grace. What I do, the good that I do, begins with God's grace, but it really is good that I do. And also, what the council is saying, let no one say that the good that I do doesn't bring me more grace, doesn't bear fruit in some way. It doesn't bring fruits. And that's what we mean by merit. That the good I do does bring more good to me in God's grace. And so, what the council was really trying to say is that my good works begin with God's grace. They're inspired with God's grace. We call it prevenient grace. That's the fancy word for it. It's just a Latin word. It means comes before. So God's grace comes first and inspires me to do good works. But those good works are really mine, and they bear some fruit, right? And so the fruit that it brings is more grace in my life, and that builds. So here's the problem with Luther, really. Luther saw salvation as our unrighteousness being covered up. He uses the image of snow on a dunghill. It's still a dunghill, right? But the snow covers it over, and so we can't smell it or see it. It looks like something pleasant. He uses another image that I come before God, and as I stand before God, or stand before the Father at judgment time, the Father looks over and sees Jesus. So says, go on in. But he's looking at Jesus, you know. For Luther, our works and grace don't change us at all. Whereas we understand that grace transforms us, beginning at baptism, and then as we cooperate with it and as we do good works, you know. So Luther's faith alone leaves no room for our cooperation. It doesn't matter what we do. But here's what the council followed St. Paul. I'll read you this just little section from Paul's letter to the Philippians. Work out your salvation with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you to will and to act according to his good purpose. God's grace works in us, inspires us to do good, and that transforms us. Grace really changes us. And fruit borne by the believer is really fruit, right? It's given by God, and it becomes a part of the believer's life. And that's what merit means, right? See, we insist as strongly as Luther that God's grace comes before any of our good. But we also affirm that our actions are part of what forms and transforms us and should be taken seriously. So our good acts lead to an increase of grace. And this is what the saints are. They're people who take the grace that God gives them and do something with that, right? And then are transformed to be able to receive more grace. I'll give you an example from one of the parables. You all remember the parable in Matthew of the master who leaves and gives 3 men talents. He gives the first man 5 talents, the second man 2 talents, and the third man 1 talent. And then he returns. And the first man comes and says, look, I've taken the 5 talents that you gave me and I've made 5 more. And the second man says, I've taken the 2 talents that you gave me and I've made 2 more. And both are commended, right? It's only the third man who says, here's your talent back. I buried it. And he's the one who's condemned, right? For doing nothing with what was given him. And I find this even more fascinating in a way. Think about this. The man who gave the talents could have said, all right, give me my talents back. But he doesn't. He doesn't even take the 5 extra talents that were made, right? The man who made 5 more talents now has 10 talents and he gets to keep them. And the same, the man with 2 talents who made 2 more, he gets to keep all 4 talents, according to the story. And even more wonderful, the master says to, hey, take the talent from the one who buried it and give it to the one with 10 talents. So now he has 11 talents. Right? And so it's an example of what I'm talking about with this. Yes, we begin with God's grace, but there are those who do something with that grace, and they're given even more. As Jesus says at the end of that parable, to the one who has, more will be given. The one who has not, what little he has even will be taken away. And it's funny, here's a little personal thing. So occasionally, I struggle sometimes with being jealous of some of the saints. And John Paul II in particular, I admire him so much, I find myself being jealous of him. And this week as I was praying, I heard Jesus say, well, you could be a saint like John Paul too. You just have to do what John Paul did. And I started to squirm a little bit, actually, because I thought, okay, there's no way I could be a saint like John Paul II, right? And what I heard was that, yeah, maybe John Paul II got 5 talents. Maybe he was the... But I've been given 1, at least. I can do something with the 1. And what difference does it make if the glass is this tall and full or this tall and full? They're both full. I could be a saint too if I used the grace that God gave me and made something with it. The fact that I wouldn't be as great a saint, that's earthly words anyway. I don't think that concept has means anything in heaven. But this is what the saints did. They took the talents, however many they were given, and they did something with them. And then they bore fruit, and that's what we call by the merits. So John Paul II merited heaven by using what God gave him and producing something. And the third thing, make us love what you command so that we may merit what you promise. That word make, sometimes I've heard people say something to me about that word. Make us. It doesn't mean do something against my will, right? But give us the grace we need to love and obey your commands. We know your grace must come first. Give me the grace, right? Inspire me. Fill me with your grace so that I may love what you command, that I may love you and live for you, you know. We're looking forward to the solemnity of All Saints this week. Let us remember that God has invited us to become saints. He's given us all some measure of grace according to his will. Whether we use that grace is up to us, but we can use it. And those works are really ours, the good works that we do with God's grace. And so let us use the grace that God gave us so we too can merit to enter eternal life.